Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I've Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to another edition of Women Around the World, where we just celebrate all the women doing all the amazing things, and we want to keep lifting them up because, you know, they need their flowers, and they should get them while they're still with us. But before we start, I do have a pretty intense personal question, and just so you know, listeners, and I did ask her before so that she was prepared. I didn't, put her on the spot. I think the people are like, oh my God, why would you ask this? it's because we love each other and we love sharing with y'all, our listeners, our personal thoughts. But for you, who has come out as queer, not so recently, but definitely recently to some people, what was the hardest part about coming out?
I think the hardest part for me, because I identify, as I've said, as like asexual / maybe gray sexual, biromantic. But I thought I was queer from high school-ish age. And that wasn't so hard in a lot of ways. As an asexual person, it was easy to like pass. So I think for me coming out, I had a lot of doubts about, well, I didn't go through all these horrific things I've seen other queer people go through, so I'm not queer enough. And then I hate to admit this, but I was almost embarrassed for people who had dated me.
Oh.
Yeah, it's terrible. Like, it's not healthy in any way, but I was embarrassed at what they would like tell their friends about dating me. And then probably the other thing was that no one would believe me, that they would dismiss it, and they would say, like, essentially what we've seen and what we've talked about in past episodes with asexuality of, oh, you just don't like sex.
Right.
So, like, that fear of being dismissed, being judged, being, like, looked down upon and ostracized. Luckily, most of the people I know have been really supportive. I've had a few that haven't, but that was definitely, it was hard. Like the like telling of someone and then that moment where they process it and me thinking, oh, they don't believe me, or they think it's a phase or something like that. They're just going to dismiss it.
Right. And I know there's a lot of conversation right now, especially in the US and around the world, as the queer community feel like they're being targeted, and they are, I think, specifically by morality police as well as the right-wing conservative political stances. But I think it's really important that we keep talking about that because what you went through, even though it's very deeply personal for you, and it is individualistic. Like, everybody goes through different things. You've had better reception from your community, which I love, which I hope you felt that way as being part of your community. But I know a lot of people haven't always had that, loss of family, a lot of homelessness, a lot of that. And I think that's really important that we keep talking about it, because even though it might be a good reception, seemingly, there's still a lot of turmoil that people go through, as you talked about within your own self. That whole, like, how are my ex-partners? I think that's legitimate. I don't think we talk about that a lot, how it affects you as much as it affects possibly those around you, but it affects you because there's one more thing added to your level of so many emotions that you are going through. And, we really want to keep talking about the queer community at all points. This is not something for us, being in an intersectional conversation constantly. We want to make sure that is something that is always at the forefront of everybody's minds. We don't want to ever come to a point that we just do things because of a month or a day. So just to put that out there, I think we've talked about this before. Same thing as like, it's Women's History Month, sure, but we talk about women all the time, and so nothing's really changed for us. And we wish that more people could do that, so we could go outside of this month, and it would be more of a regular thing. That it doesn't have to be highlighted. It would be a delight not to have to do these things in order for any recognition to be done. Right. But that's a sidebar that I always like to add in. But today, we also wanted to talk about another queer woman who's doing some amazing things, and that is Bianka Rodriguez. And Bianca is a Salvadorian trans activist who has been a leader in her home and for the LGBTQ plus community. Born in 1993 in San Salvador, Bianca has seen the continued violence and discrimination around her. Though she was supported by her father when she started to discover her true identity at the age of 5, it wasn't long-lived. She lost her father at the age of 6, and unfortunately her mother was not so understanding and was fairly abusive and unwilling to accept Bianca and forced her to leave to go and live with her grandmother, who had, quote, I don't want this to come out as if saying I'm saying this, so this is, quote, come to terms with who Bianca was and accepted it. So she did have a little bit of support.
Yes, and with her grandmother's support, Bianca graduated high school and moved on to get her degree in agro-industrial engineering. But due to the targeted harassment and bullying from the school, Bianca eventually dropped out. And she experienced many hardships outside of just school, and she continued to try to find jobs and a way to survive and support herself. But she also continued to be rejected due to her ID, which misgendered her. As she has said, quote, we live in a situation in which society at large discriminates against us and the state discriminates against us. The only option left is to try to survive in a country that denies us our rights. In 2015, Bianca adopted her new name and identity and worked to do more not only for herself, but for those who were in similar situations as she was.
So in a 2021 Human Rights Watch report, it was stated that the Salvadorian government admitted that the LGBTQI plus community, quote, faced torture, inhuman or degrading treatment, excessive use of force, illegal and arbitrary arrest, and other forms of abuse, much of it committed by public security agents, which forced many of the LGBTQI plus community to flee from their home. Many of the queer community in El Salvador has been a target of violence, and the government has done very little to help the community. In 2020, 3 police officers were found guilty in the killing of Camila Diaz Cordova, a transgender woman who had been deported by the U.S., which is a whole other conversation we need to get into. And though the conviction was a good sign that perhaps people would be held accountable, there's so much more to be done. As in fact, they talked about the amount of violence that is happening, and much of them being transgender communities being targeted. LGBTQI plus community in El Salvador has not been protected, as in fact, one presidential nominee previously had went all the way in, kind of like some of our political people right now, in being anti-LGBTQ rights, as well as really pushing to use harmful rhetoric around that community. And Blanca, again, has seen violence of this nature at firsthand, including being abducted and held at gunpoint. But she's been able to make it out and has become a fierce advocate to protect others from the constant targeted violence and harassment. She said in a UN article, quote, in El Salvador, my country, LGBTIQ plus people are killed, beaten by gangs, sexually abused, and persecuted. Trans people face the most danger, but together we can change things.
She began volunteering at Comcavas Trans, a Salvadorian nonprofit that works for the rights of the LGBTQI plus community and HIV-positive people. Under the leadership of Kayla Avalar, she became the communications manager, and after Avalar was forced to flee, Bianca stepped in as the executive director of Comcavas Trans, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And under her leadership since then, Bianca has been an advocate and leader for the trans community and even named UNHCR's first trans woman high-profile supporter, allowing her to continue to speak up and advocate for her community and country.
Right, and here's a bit of the history on Comcavas, and we're calling this Comcavas. We don't know if that's how it's said or it's supposed to be COMCAVIS. So sorry, we took it from their site, could not find any pronunciations, but we want to recognize them. So the history on Comcavas Trans, from their site, comcavas.org. Comcavas Trans Association was born in response to the needs felt by trans women participating in the various support groups, people with HIV, to feel discriminated against, not represented, and did not obtain the required information according to their own characteristics. And on July 5th, 2008, Comcavas Trans was founded with the purpose of having a support support group with which you could fill identified trans women and thus strengthen your knowledge on HIV, antiretroviral therapy, human rights, stigma and discrimination, gender identity and related interests, and direct populations of trans women's issues. With the passing of time, Comcavus Trans is defined as a non-political, non-religious, non-governmental organization and non-profit which aims to, quote, represent, defend, ensure, and promote human rights and interests of women trans to foster their development and respect for human dignity. Obtaining legal status on December 8, 2011, when the Ministry of Interior gives its judicial personality, and which was published in the Official Gazette on December 22nd, 2011. Since its inception, Comcavus Trans does its job with respect and subject to national laws, to public order based on the impartiality, regardless of gender identity, sexual orientation, race, sex, creed, nationality, social status, and political affiliations. So your help routed with the high spirit of service and objective understanding governed by the fundamental rights and freedoms. So that was from their site, translated.
Bianka has been awarded the Nansen Refugee Award for her work, as well as her continued work with United Nations. She has pushed to bring awareness of the violence and harassment targeted at the LGBTQI+ community and continues to work with Comcavus to help provide services and safe spaces for her community. Bianka's vision, as she has said, is, quote, to continue empowering new leaders, particularly trans leaders, to provide attention to forcefully displayed LGBTIQ+ persons with life-saving assistance, as well as small-scale entrepreneurship opportunities to mitigate the impact of displacement and rebuild their lives.
Amazing. So she does not have a Wikipedia page. So if someone wants to take that on, they really should.
Yes.
And let us know because she's doing some amazing work and she should be recognized as she stands firm in trying to advocate for her people, for herself, and it's beautiful to see.
Yeah, and going back to what you asked me at the top, I guess another thing I would add is that it's hard. I'll speak to my own experience, but if so many people or the messages you're getting are, this isn't right, this is wrong, this is sinful. And for me, I tried to convince myself for a long time that it was a phase and it will pass and I can be, quote, normal and I can have this life and that's what I should want. So it is really hard to have all this messaging coming at you and stand firm and be like, no, this is who I am, and fight for yourself and for people in your community when, again, you're just inundated with this messaging that's telling you to like be quiet and just go along. Yeah, stop rocking the boat.
Right. I mean, essentially, that's kind of Bianka's experience was as a child, her mother tried to abuse it out of her, locked her in rooms so she wouldn't dress in dresses, essentially. And yeah, you can't, like, there's so many things that you really, if it was up to you, if it was truly a choice, so much simpler to follow the status quo. And that's what people aren't understanding. It's not about, that's this like fanfare of like, they're trying to be dramatic. It's no, they're just trying to live our life. Why?
Yes. So as always, inspiring work here, very important work. And we're going to continue to look out for what Bianka does. Get on that Wikipedia page, somebody. Please.
Somebody.
Please. And as always, if you have somebody you think we should be talking about on this segment or any other suggestion, you can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram at Stuff Mom Never Told You. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.